You are probably sitting in, or maybe driving back to, the absolute biggest financial lever you are ever going to pull in your life.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, for most of you listening to this right now, your home is the bedrock of your family's net worth. It's everything.
Right.
Naturally, you'd assume the laws protecting a transaction of that magnitude, govern the most critical parts of the deal. But what if the entire regulatory architecture we rely on is, well, looking in completely the wrong direction?
And that's exactly our mission for this deep dive. We really want to map out the actual structural blueprints of the real estate market.
Yeah.
We want to show you where the enforceable rules stop and where this massive, totally unregulated frontier of information control begins.
It's like a Wild West.
It really is. We're going to look at how the rules currently protect physical property while leaving the digital pathways that actually control the market just wide open to manipulation.
And to guide us through this landscape, we have a really compelling stack of source material today.
We do.
We're diving into a text from the Market Nobody Regulates series. And we're also analyzing the ground-level operational models of the SIR team out of Pennsylvania.
Right, getting that practical application.
Exactly. Plus, we're breaking down some recent legal precedents that expose how this market actually functions behind closed doors. Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Our sources point out that the real estate industry basically relies on three main pillars of regulation, right? Fair housing, disclosure laws, and agent conduct rules.
Yeah, those are the big three.
But the core argument here is that these rules strictly govern physical property and human beings. They completely ignore the information environment.
Completely.
Yeah.
And to really see that gap, we have to look at the mechanics of how those laws actually apply. So let's start with fair housing.
Okay.
The legislation was designed to ensure physical access to the market. Basically, it dictates that a human agent cannot deny you a physical showing of a property based on your race, religion, background, all of that.
Which is a crucial protection, obviously.
It is, at the front door at least. But here's the crazy part. There are zero regulatory requirements governing how a digital platform ranks the listings you see on your phone.
Wait, really? Zero?
Zero. A tech company can just write an algorithm that decides which specific inventory surfaces on your screen and, which inventory gets buried.
Wow.
And those algorithms are not subject to any federal housing audits to ensure they aren't subtly biasing who sees what.
Yeah, that's wild. And then you look at disclosure laws. I mean, anyone who has bought a house knows about the absolute mountain of paperwork you have to sign at closing.
Oh yeah, the hand cramps are real.
Right. It's all detailing the physical condition of the property. You get a document stating the roof was replaced 5 years ago or that the basement flooded in 2018.
Yeah, but notice what you just said. It's all about the physical atoms of the house.
Exactly. And they're self-reported by the seller, they vary state by state, and they require absolutely no disclosure about the information environment surrounding the transaction.
None at all.
There's no independent auditor checking the data feeds you just used to make your million-dollar purchasing decision.
Which brings us right to agent conduct. State licensing boards and the National Association of Realtors, they have these extensive codes of ethics.
Super extensive.
But those rules apply exclusively to the licensed human professionals facilitating the transaction. They do not apply to the digital platforms that host the market.
Right. So a real estate agent has a legal obligation to operate with transparency, but the tech platform hosting the listing does not.
Precisely.
It's like having incredibly strict safety codes for the bricks and mortar of a house, but absolutely zero rules for the GPS you have to use to find the house in the first place.
That is a perfect way to put it.
Right. And worse, what if that GPS is secretly being paid by someone to route you into the middle of nowhere? Technically, the house passes every single safety inspection, but the compromised information ecosystem completely dooms your search.
And when you realize that those digital pathways are exempt from the rules governing the physical world, you start to see the huge opportunity for exploitation.
Oh, for sure.
Because technology companies have brilliantly positioned themselves to the public and to regulators, honestly, as just neutral infrastructure.
Just a helpful tool.
Exactly. They claim to be nothing more than a digital pipeline connecting buyers and sellers.
Mm-hmm.
But a pipeline just transports material, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't decide the value of the material inside it.
Yeah, good point.
What's fascinating here is how these so-called neutral platforms actually dictate what buyers and sellers see, exactly when they see it, and at what price they're anchored, and they carry none of the fiduciary obligations of a licensed agent.
Okay, but I have to push back on that a little bit.
Go for it.
Aren't these platforms ultimately just search engines for houses? Like, if I open an app, I type in my zip code, and I filter for 3 bedrooms, a list of available homes pops up.
Right.
Why should a tech company be held to the standard of a fiduciary agent if they're really just returning search results?
Because they write the algorithms that determine the hierarchy of those results. When an app decides that house A appears at the very top of page 1 and house B is pushed to page 10, they are actively directing the flow of human attention. They aren't just showing the market, they're actively shaping it.
That makes sense.
And more importantly, look at the mechanics of automated valuations. You know, those estimated prices platforms cluster next to every listing.
Oh, yeah, everyone checks those.
Right, but those numbers aren't passive reflections of the market. They act as psychological anchors.
Yeah.
If a platform's proprietary, totally unregulated algorithm decides your home is worth 20% less than the house across the street, buyers walk in the door with that bias already established.
Wow, the platform is actively shaping seller realities and buyer expectations.
Exactly.
And this is happening in the exact market where you, the listener, hold the vast majority of your wealth.
I mean, this isn't an algorithm suggesting a movie you might not like.
Not at all. If a platform artificially depresses the perceived value of your neighborhood through some tweak in their unregulated code, your family's net worth takes a direct financial hit.
Right.
And there is literally no regulatory body you can call to audit that algorithm.
So if these tech platforms are legally allowed to manipulate the flow of information in the dark without consequence, we have to ask what happens when human institutions attempt to play that exact same game.
Oh, and we have an answer for that.
We do. We actually have a multi-billion-dollar answer to that question, courtesy of the recent National Association of Realtors settlement.
Yes. The 2023 Kansas City federal jury case. This is like the ultimate proof of concept for the danger of unregulated information.
It really is.
So a jury looked at the National Association of Realtors, NAR, and found them liable for a conspiracy to hide compensation information. And the mechanics of this are just wild.
Truly.
Before this settlement, a buyer's agent could look at the back end of the multiple listing service, the MLS, and see exactly how much commission a seller was offering.
Right, but the buyer couldn't see it.
Exactly. The buyer could not see that number at all.
And that asymmetrical information created an environment for a practice called steering.
Steering, right.
Because the agent knew the compensation, but the buyer didn't. An agent could subtly steer their client away from homes offering a, say, 2% commission and toward homes offering a 3% commission.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the buyer simply assumes the agent is curating the best homes for their needs, completely unaware that their own representation is being influenced by hidden financial incentives.
Let's do the math on that really quick, because the numbers explain the whole verdict.
Let's hear it.
If you are selling a $500,000 house, the difference between offering a 2% buyer's agent commission and a 3% commission is $5,000.
Which is real money.
Huge money. But if sellers feel forced to offer the higher 3% just to prevent agents from steering buyers away, they are unknowingly structuring a transaction against their own financial interests.
Absolutely.
The jury saw millions of sellers taking these hits and awarded $1.78 billion in damages.
Staggering.
And under federal antitrust law, that number automatically trebles, meaning it multiplies by 3 as a punitive measure.
Right.
So facing a potential liability of over $5 billion, NAR settled for $418 million. And the rules changed. Written buyer agreements are now mandatory, and compensation cannot be hidden inside MLS listings anymore.
Right. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the monetary penalty is honestly just a secondary detail.
Really? How so?
The crucial takeaway is the mechanism of discovery. The only reason a jury could prove consumer harm was because a paper trail existed.
Oh.
The compensation offers were logged into the MLS database. Data analysts and antitrust lawyers could subpoena those records, reconstruct the patterns of steering, and definitively prove the financial damage. The harm was actionable because the data actually survived.
So what does this all mean? I mean, it basically means it took years of grueling litigation, a massive class action lawsuit, and a federal jury to fix one single issue of compensation transparency simply because a human paper trail existed.
Exactly.
The terrifying implication here is the harm happening without a paper trail. The obvious parallel is the tech platforms we just discussed.
Right.
They are controlling market attention and anchoring prices, but they don't leave a paper trail for a lawyer to subpoena.
And that reality totally complicates how we view the multiple listing service itself. I mean, we just discussed how the MLS was the environment where these hidden commissions were logged,
Right.
yet our source material strongly argues that the MLS remains the most vital safety net the consumer actually has.
Wait. You just told me the MLS was the exact database that was weaponized to facilitate steering. How can our sources now argue it is our only safety net?
It sounds contradictory, I know, but
Well,
it's because the MLS, despite its deep flaws, is the only mechanism that establishes a minimum standard of accountability in residential real estate.
okay, walk me through that.
When a home is officially listed on the MLS, several non-negotiable things happen. It explicitly becomes subject to fair housing rules. The foundational facts of the property's square footage, lot size, taxes are documented in a standardized format.
Right.
The transaction is forced into a framework of public record. It is a highly regulated, shared database that demands at least a baseline level of professional responsibility.
You know, our sources use a really great financial analogy to explain this.
Oh, the SEC one?
Yeah, they compare a home on the MLS to a financial security that has passed its minimum disclosure threshold with the SEC.
It's a great comparison.
Right. Being listed on a public stock exchange doesn't guarantee the company is profitable, and being on the MLS doesn't guarantee the house is perfect or even priced correctly.
Exactly.
But it provides undeniable proof that a regulatory process ran. It brings the property out of the shadows and guarantees the pool of potential buyers is as broad and democratic as possible.
Yes, and you really have to contrast that regulated environment with the growing industry trend of private listings.
Oh, yeah, this is a big one.
When a property is sold as a private off-market listing, it bypasses that entire public framework. It skips the foundational accountability of the MLS completely.
See, here is where it gets really interesting to me. Because I have to admit, as a buyer, if my agent calls me and says, hey, I have access to an exclusive off-market private listing, I am thrilled.
Of course you are. It sounds great.
It feels like getting a VIP pass to a secret menu. I don't have to fight 30 other buyers at an open house.
And that emotional appeal, that illusion of an inside edge,
Hmm.
is exactly why private listings are so effective and honestly, so dangerous.
Dangerous.
Yeah, because when you accept that VIP pass, you are agreeing to operate completely in the dark. You are stripped of the baseline protections, the standardized documentation, and the public accountability of the open market. And if you are the seller agreeing to a private listing, you have inherently failed to maximize your buyer pool. I mean, the only true way to discover the fair market value of an asset is to expose it to the maximum number of potential bidders. A private listing trades maximum financial leverage for a false sense of exclusivity.
That makes a ton of sense. So if the systemic architecture is this precarious, if tech platforms shape the market in the dark and private listings strip away our public safety nets, how do you actually navigate a transaction safely?
That is the million-dollar question.
Because you can't just opt out of housing, right? We need to look at a ground-level application of protection.
Yes, let's look at how it works in the real world.
Let's examine how professionals actually shield their clients from these regulatory gaps. Specifically, looking at Vincent and Jane Sear of the Sear team at Real of Pennsylvania.
To really understand their operational model, we have to look at the environment they specialize in. Jane Sear holds an RCSD certification.
And that stands for Real Estate Collaboration Specialist Divorce.
Right. Correct. And a divorce is the absolute crucible of real estate representation. It is the highest stakes stress test of literally everything we have discussed today.
I can only imagine.
You are dealing with strict, court-ordered timelines, hostile parties who are actively trying to squeeze equity from one another, and immense legally binding fiduciary obligations to a judge.
Yeah, when a judge orders a house sold by a certain date, and you have two spouses whose financial and emotional interests are violently opposed, any flaw in the representation is going to cause immediate financial destruction.
Oh, absolutely.
It is an environment where you simply cannot afford hidden information or divided loyalties.
Which is exactly why the SEER team combats the regulatory gap by operating on a strict fiduciary-only model. They absolutely refuse to practice dual agency.
Dual agency, that's when a single agent or a single broker represents both the buyer and the seller in the exact same transaction, right?
Yep.
To put that in perspective for you listening, imagine a single lawyer trying to represent both the plaintiff and the defendant in a lawsuit.
It's impossible.
You cannot negotiate the highest possible price for the seller while simultaneously negotiating the lowest possible price for the buyer. You are serving two masters with diametrically opposed goals. Yet, in real estate, dual agency is perfectly legal in many states.
It's wild. In a system where the rules already fail to protect information integrity, introducing an agent with divided loyalties is just a recipe for consumer harm.
For sure.
By committing exclusively to a fiduciary-only model, the SIR team ensures their loyalty is legal and practically undivided. They will only ever represent the buyer, or they will only ever represent the seller.
Never both.
Never both. They artificially create a localized zone of absolute protection for their client, using their own operational boundaries to bridge the gap the law currently ignores.
And this is a proven, battle-tested model. The SIR team has executed over 400 transactions since 2009.
That's a massive track record.
It is. They operate across Chester, Delaware, and Montgomery counties in Pennsylvania, plus Newcastle County in Delaware. They haven't just identified the flaws in the regulatory architecture. They've built a day-to-day business model specifically designed to insulate consumers from those flaws.
And it proves that until legislation catches up to the reality of the information age, consumer protection is not going to come from federal housing codes or tech platform algorithms.
Right.
It has to come from the structural, ethical boundaries set by the human professionals you actually choose to hire.
So true. All right, let's do a quick recap of the journey we just took. We started by exposing how our current laws fiercely protect the physical walls of a property and the licensing of human agents, but leave the digital information environment completely unregulated.
Wide open.
We saw how platforms exploit that gap to anchor prices and shape market attention without any fiduciary duty. We broke down the math of the NAR settlement, proving how hidden compensation data cost sellers billions, and why the public record of the MLS is a vital safety net compared to the dark waters of private listings.
Exactly.
And finally, we saw how professionals navigate this flawed system using strict, fiduciary-only boundaries to shield their clients when the law falls short.
We have looked really closely at the mechanisms of how information is controlled today. But consider where this trajectory leads.
Okay.
We now know that human agents hiding compensation data required a billion-dollar federal lawsuit to fix. But as tech platforms remove human fiduciaries entirely and rely more and more on artificial intelligence.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. We're approaching a scenario where AI doesn't just rank homes, but actively buys and sells them based on proprietary data totally hidden from the public.
That's scary.
If the housing market begins to function less like a neighborhood open house and more like a dark pool stock exchange where algorithms trade homes in the shadows, well, ask yourself, if an algorithm secretly biases the automated valuation of your neighborhood tomorrow, depressing your home's value without ever leaving a paper trail, who exactly is going to protect you then?
Man, that is something you definitely need to be thinking about the next time you open a real estate app on your phone. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. Stay curious, keep looking past the surface, and never stop questioning the systems built around you. We'll catch you next time.